You are listening to Topic Paranormal with your host, Georgina Holzmeyer, and the Paranormal Brain Trust, Robert M. Brown, Nick Landy, and Rachel Sosa. Topic Paranormal covers Paranormal Talk, Paranormal Tales, Paranormal Training, and so much more. Experience the topics of conversation on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Topic Paranormal. Have a topic suggestion or a question? Send an email to topicparanormal@gmail.com or post it to the Topic Paranormal Facebook page. Topic Paranormal is part of the Astronet Radio family. Visit astronetradio.com for more awesome podcasts. And now, your host, Georgina Holzmeyer.
Hello and welcome to Topic Paranormal. Hey, I hope y'all had some great holiday celebrations last week, hopefully with your family and things like that. And we are very lucky today. Nick Landy, one of our Paranormal Brain Trust members, will be joining us. We're going to be talking about Christmas traditions and paranormal ghost stories and things along those lines. So let's start. Nick, I know you actually have some family Christmas activities coming up today. So give me a little idea, what are some of the Christmas traditions that you and your family participate in or have started?
Well, we participate a lot in the more modernized traditions, I guess you could say. Opening gifts on Christmas Eve, or something we haven't done in a while, which we used to do when my grandmother was alive, was make a big batch of homemade Christmas peanut butter fudge.
Oh, that sounds yummy.
And I actually brought that up to the family this year. I'm like, when are we going to start doing that again? Because we haven't had that in forever. Oh. So hopefully we'll get back around to that one at some point here.
That sounds like a time-consuming one as well.
Oh, it is, but that's the fun part of it, because you're all in the kitchen gathered up, or in the dining room gathered up, and you're just talking, hanging out, playing card games, whatever, while you prepare this fudge.
Right. So it also gives you time to catch up with everybody on what's going on in their lives. 'Cause I believe if your family's like mine, that we're kind of geographically extended. It's not like everybody lives within just a couple of miles anymore.
Right. Oh, yeah. We have most of our family's in Texas now, after a majority of us came down from up north from the West Virginia, Pittsburgh area. But for the most part, even in Texas is so large, we're far away from each other.
I love the fact that you brought up the peanut butter fudge making. That was always one of the things that I enjoyed as a little girl, was when my grandmother and my mom would get together before Christmas and make all the divinity and the pecan logs and all that great, awesome candy, My favorite was she made this little chocolate fudgy thing. They were called cathedral windows. And it was like fudge chocolate with the multicolored little miniature marshmallows, and it was mint flavored chocolate rolled in pecans. So yeah, that was one of my favorites, along with the divinity. My immediate family, with myself, my husband, and my boys, what we do for Christmas Eve is cook a really fabulous, kind of over-the-top Christmas meal. We did goose this year with oyster stuffing. Yeah. And we've done lamb racks, we've done turduckens, we've done a variety of, that's just our thing, to have this really nice candlelight dinner. And one of the things I was noticing as I was talking with my kids over the holidays about some of the traditions we started and why we started them, and where some of them come from, and how some of them have been around so long people don't really know where they came from.
Right.
So as we're talking about this, one of the things comes to mind is the Christmas tree and decorating a Christmas tree.
Yes.
Now, did you decorate a tree this year?
I did decorate a tree this year. It was actually the first tree I've decorated in about 4 or 5 years since my divorce. So it wasn't big. I got a small, about 3 or 4 foot tree, and I didn't have any ornaments to go on it, but that's all right. It was pre-lit, so I took the easy way out this year. I did find one ornament floating around in a box somewhere, which was an H-E-B ornament, which that's the grocery company I work for. So that was fun. But then it was nice because people started just randomly bringing me ornaments out of nowhere. So I was able to get my tree decorated with ornaments that were given to me, which I think is pretty cool because now I have these ornaments that actually mean something from a personal standpoint.
Oh, sweet.
That I can use every year. Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome. I love those ornaments with that memories. Obviously, I have children, so I've got everything from, the plaster of Paris handprint to pipe cleaner reindeers, and those are the ones that are very special that have those memories. And so, obviously, that was one of the traditions I was interested in. That particular song, "O Tannenbaum," or "O Christmas Tree," goes way back to, I want to say, like the mid-1600s, early 1700s. And that's one of those traditions that's been around for a long time that actually comes from more of the Druid type belief systems. Trees were brought into the house because they were representative of fertility and good luck. And so that's kind of how Christmas tree decorating got started. They would add all these little ornaments, basically what we would consider an ornament. They would add a cluster of acorns or some mistletoe or some ivy. And that, if you listen to a lot of the older Christmas carols, you'll hear references to all of those things. For instance, the Deck the Halls song, they talk about decking the halls with the boughs of holly and things along those lines. So that was interesting, and it's given me an opportunity to talk a lot with my kids about some of those things. One of the things I've never done is sat around and told ghost stories at Christmas. Now, Nick, how about you and your families?
No, I can't say that we ever have, at least not in the tradition of it being a Christmas tradition, not in that traditional sense. We've sat around recently since I've started paranormal investigating and told, or I told and they listened to some of the things we've experienced while on investigations, but I wouldn't really call that a Christmas tradition for us. But if you think about it, that's something that started a long time ago too, and even Dickens' Christmas Carol is a ghost story. It's one of the most popular ghost stories out there. It's also one of the most popular Christmas stories out there. You got Scrooge, and he's visited by 3 spirits on Christmas Eve, and they're guiding him and directing him where to go and what to do with his life and how his life can turn out if he doesn't change his ways. So, I can see that being a tradition that maybe got lost over time with just that one ghost story sticking around.
Yeah, you would think if one survived, there must have been several others at one point in time, correct?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I also watched A Christmas Carol. It's part of the Christmas tradition is to watch A Christmas Carol. And we watched several different versions. And I love the older ones, where Marley's ghost is in the typical misty formation in the rags, rattling his chains at the door.
Well, now that's the best version. And just a cool little fact about me, just for the listeners that don't know, I do perform plays at the theater where we do a lot of investigating and recording for the podcast. And I played Marley one year in A Christmas Carol, which was really fun because I did the tattered rags and the chains and all that. So that was really a neat character to play.
Now, did you do the whole white face makeup as well?
Oh yeah,
or how did you get that effect?
I was all decked out. We had an old Victorian type wig on me with the ponytail and the white face paint and the chains and the tattered rags and everything, the whole nine.
So you must have been pretty scary, it sounds like.
I think I made some kids cry. I did, yeah.
Well, we can definitely contribute that to maybe being a source for that immediate typical ghost image that comes to our mind whenever we do start talking about ghost stories.
Right.
That's usually what we picture. it was interesting. One of the things I found out while researching a little bit more about this ghost story tradition, this was a huge thing back in the early Victorian times, and that would have been the 1800s to the mid 1920s, roughly, in that time frame. That was an actual tradition. They gathered the family around. They sat and they told these ghost stories. And so it's very interesting. We're going to look at a few more of those here in a little bit. But Charles Dickens, for instance, his tale was written in 1843. And of course, at that holiday classic. Did you know that the original title of that was actually A Ghost Story of Christmas?
You know, I think I actually recall that being told to me in an AP English class one time in high school, but for some reason it just never stuck with me, and I guess that's just because, you know, for 35 years of my life I've heard it called A Christmas Carol, or in the Bill Murray sense of it, Scrooged. Yeah.
That's another great version of it, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Love Bill Murray, love Scrooged. Everything Bill Murray.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, here's a side note for you. One of my favorite scenes in Zombieland is when the kid shoots Bill Murray.
Oh, yeah.
As he's coming in,
yeah.
you know.
Definitely. And if you haven't seen the second Zombieland, which just came out on digital, I watched it the other night. Bill Murray makes an awesome cameo appearance in that one too, so check it out.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that one. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and move into our commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this Victorian tradition of telling ghost stories. And we're back. Hope you enjoyed those commercials. When we left off, we were talking about ghost stories in the Victorian era, how that was a tradition at Christmas to sit around and tell ghost stories. And one of the things we discovered in our research on some of these traditions is along the lines of Yuletide. And I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that phrase. How about you, Nick? Are you familiar with that one?
I'm familiar with it from being a lyric in songs.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a tradition that, you know, I think we practiced it all during the Yuletide season. So that's about the extent of my knowledge on Yuletide is that it was a lyric from time to times.
Well, and what we learned in our podcast from last week in talking with Rachel Sosa, a friend of ours who is also a Paranormal Brain Trust member and is a practicing witch, she actually explained Yuletide as a symbolic type celebration. They were celebrating basically the death of light and of the longest night of the year. Just this past week was the winter solstice,
right.
The longest night, shortest day thing. And so that's what that was all about. They were through planting. They had already done all the harvest, and now it was time to rest a bit. But it was also a very scary time for people. You think about even as far back as when you're talking about the Picts and the Saxons before the Vikings, even before we get to the Middle Ages and those time frames, there was no medical technology. There was no electricity. Even hygiene was not followed very well. So there was a lot of death going on, and it was usually happening during the winter.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, why would you think that is, Nick?
You know, I really don't know. I would have to say it has a lot to do with the weather, for sure. I mean, it's darker, it's colder. They didn't really have ways outside of having a nice big coat or blanket or a fire to keep warm. And that cold can really amp up an illness. I can speak to that from experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I would agree with you. The temperature, the lack of good shelter or effective shelter. We're sitting here today recording at the theater, and it's kind of cool and rainy out there. I can't imagine having to sit actually out in that for any length of time. This is supposed to be pretty much going on all day, so definitely a contributing factor. So, and I think there was a lot of superstition and just lack of knowledge as well about what caused death, unless a rock fell on them and they obviously saw somebody died.
Right.
I said, death isn't funny, but oh, yeah, actually sometimes it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not like they had weathermen back in those days, it's not like science was too advanced to where they could understand what was killing them was a contributing factor was the weather. So yeah, I could see where it would be a mystery to some,
And so that's kind of where the whole Yuletide comes from, is celebrating the death of light, longest night of the year, and kind of explaining a little bit about why death was so superstitious and mystical back then. It's also, if you'll notice, in most of the ghost stories and even some of the horror stories that are written, a lot of them are set in the month of December, or in the fall or winter, when it is, it's got a natural gloom to the story, I guess, by setting it at that time frame. In fact, way back when in high school, I had to do an English research paper. God forbid, I hated those things. But anyway, and we had to choose an author, and the one I chose was Mary Shelley. And for those of you that are familiar with Frankenstein, that was the novel that she wrote.
Yes.
And the backstory on that, she actually wrote that in the summer, but that was the year, let me look real quick. They called that the year without a summer. And basically, the volcanic ash from the eruption of Mount Tambora basically screwed up the atmosphere. So even though it was June, they weren't going outside. It was rainy, it was cloudy, it was gloomy, it was overcast the entire summer. And so that was the reason it was the year without the summer. So Mary Shelley was already in this environment that was gloomy like winter. But she did set her story in December. And that kind of came about because Lord Byron, the poet, and Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's wife, and a couple of other people were basically vacationing in that area, and they were looking for something to do. And so that was the challenge, was, hey, go write a story. Let's all write a ghost story, and of all of them, Mary Shelley's is the only one that really came out and is truly a horror story. So there you go, some Frankenstein trivia. Let's see. And speaking along those lines, back then in the Victorian era, the publishing houses and newspapers would actually publish ghost stories at Christmas. That was the best-selling time of the year for ghost stories based on these traditions.
Wow.
And so that was kind of interesting to hear about that aspect of ghost stories. What about you, Nick? Do you happen to write ghost stories at all?
Gosh, I used to. I used to write a lot when I was in those advanced English classes in high school, because I had to. But I enjoyed it to a certain extent too. And now that you mention it, I do remember writing more stories about doom and gloom or paranormal around that winter time of year. I can see again people being affected by the atmosphere, by the environment. What's going on around them causes them to have that feeling. It's just like during a paranormal investigation. If you go somewhere that's cold or chilly and you get those goosebumps on your arms, it makes you feel different, auspicious, like you're trying to figure out what's going on around you. And then sitting, of course, by the fire, warming up and getting that warm feeling. And then it kind of makes your attitude kind of become positive again and kind of washes all that away. So yeah, I can definitely see why people would write and tell ghost stories during this time of year, because it naturally has that kind of feel to it. Just scientifically it has that kind of feel to it.
Definitely. I would agree. When I'm out on a sunny spring day, I'm not thinking much about ghosts unless we're actually on an investigation. But it's pretty easy in this gloomy weather to see that.
Definitely.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I thought it was interesting. I actually found there's a publishing company out there called Valancourt, and they have a book they've printed of some of these ghost stories from the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Cool.
And so, I'll post a picture of that book later on the Facebook page, so that way anyone that's interested in it, y'all can grab it. I think I got it off of Amazon. But I found some of these intros really kind of interesting, so I did want to share those with y'all. I think I would definitely be buying this book after I finish up on this podcast. This one was written by John Berwick Harwood, and the title of his story was Horror, A True Tale. And it reads, this is basically like the little intro blurb that they put on the back of the covers and in magazine ads and such like that to get you to buy the book.
All right.
And his intro was, in the sickly light, I saw it lying on the bed with its grim head on the pillow. A man or a corpse arisen from its unhallowed grave.
Ooh.
And awaiting the demon that animated it.
Wow.
That sounds pretty spooky to me.
That's a good little start to that one there.
Doesn't that automatically make you think of a couple of those spirits from A Christmas Carol?
Yeah.
Pretty descriptive,
Definitely.
isn't it? Hey, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. It's going back to grade school and middle school here, just round the horn. Everybody take a turn reading kind of deal?
Yeah, let's
okay.
do that.
All right.
Let's keep them entertained.
Let's make it fun. This one is by Ada Busson. The Ghost's Summons. Suddenly I aroused with a start, and as ghostly a thrill of horror as ever I remember to have felt in my life. Something, what I knew not, seemed near, something nameless, but unutterably awful.
Ooh, there's some chills for you. I tell you what, between these two, I don't know that I actually want to go to bed tonight. Huh? And those are just a couple. This next one is from Walter Scott's book, The Tapestried Chamber. There was no longer any question what she was or any thought of her being a living being. Upon a face which wore the fixed features of a corpse were imprinted the traces of the vilest and most hideous passions which had animated her while she lived.
Wow.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that one there makes me wonder, maybe she was a serial killer?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe she was like, oh, who's the lady in New Orleans that tortured her slaves upstairs in the attic? They've actually... American Horror Story filmed The Coven at her house. It's like right on the tip of my tongue.
Oh my gosh, I cannot think of the name, but I know exactly what you're talking about because
it's
Kathy
Madam.
Bates made that role. She made that season of American Horror Story. And speaking of Kathy Bates and this subject that we're on right now, Stephen King, one of my favorite authors, typically tends to place some of his most chilling stories around this time of year as well. I mean, look at Misery. And The Shining, of course.
Yeah, you can't get much more horrific than that.
Right.
Oh. In fact, so we're going to move into commercial break. And when we come back, Nick and I are going to shift the conversation, and we're going to talk a little bit about different experiments that we use in paranormal investigation. And we'll see where that conversation takes us. Enjoy these commercials. Hello and welcome back. We are going to shift our conversation now from spooky Christmas traditions, which was really interesting because you get into those ghost stories back then. You think about even A Christmas Carol. Scrooge was trying to figure out in the beginning if these were real ghosts or if he was just dreaming. And he didn't have a whole lot of experimental procedures or protocols or methods or equipment at hand. So he was basically relying on his own senses and asking questions of the spirits and things like that. Mm-hmm. So bless his little heart, he had to just trust his own senses on that. Now we, Topic Paranormal, a couple of our Brain Trust members, a couple of listeners, myself as well. We're going to be doing an overnight investigation in mineral wells coming up in a couple of weeks.
Oh yeah.
And so one of the things that we're going to be concentrating on during this time frame is some different experiments. And so we're going to spend the next little bit talking about some of the experiments we're going to use, what they do, the results we hope to get out of it. And then in January, after and during that investigation, we're actually going to be recording episodes as well, keeping y'all up to date on the experiments we used, what results we got, all of that good stuff. So if you're listening tonight, you want to be sure and listen to the next 3 or 4 episodes in order to get all of that information.
Mm-hmm, right.
Now, Nick, let's talk a little bit about the Gansfeld. I know that's one of your favorite ones.
Absolutely.
So go for it.
Well, I love the Gansfeld, and the first time that I saw the Gansfeld was on an episode of what's the name of it, with Amy Bruni and Adam Berry.
Kindred Spirits.
Kindred Spirits.
One of my faves.
Excellent show. One of very few paranormal programs I actually trust, and we'll talk about that later at some point down the road. Georgina and I have some personal experience with that. But yeah, I love the way they did it, and the way they did it was Adam was in, say, an upstairs or downstairs room. He was far away from Amy. Amy was the one performing the experiment. She had headphones, she had blindfold, and I believe she was hooked up to a portal box or a cell phone or a laptop that had one of those apps for communication on it that the spirits can supposedly, manipulate and talk to you on. And Adam would ask a question in a distant location, and Amy would respond with what she was hearing through the headphones. And they would come together at the end, and interestingly enough, some of the questions that he was asking that she couldn't hear, they were getting legit responses to. So I thought that was kind of cool. So we did that. I think it was you, I, and Rachel.
Yes.
At the other haunted hill house, which I think was Gainesville,
in Gainesville,
Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of haunted hill houses out there. So do your research when you decide to go investigate one. Make sure you're going to one where
the one you think you're going to.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you're going to the right location and you don't drive somewhere different. But we did that experiment there, and I think it went along very well.
I think so too. That was really interesting. At that point, you were still just developing your skills. Even, I don't know for sure that you even felt like you had psychic abilities at that point, right?
No, at that point, no, I didn't. Not at all. At that point, I was still very, very skeptical about the whole psychic mind. And that's something about me that y'all have to understand when I talk about my abilities and everything, is this is coming from a person who spent 33 years of his life thinking the psychic phenomena and all of that was absolute bullshit. Like, I was the biggest psychic skeptic out there. And it wasn't until I met Georgina and Rachel and started getting responses from them, and especially Rachel, on who members of my family were, situations that was going on in my life. I was like, I just met you. How the hell did you know that? So... And then discovering that I had these abilities myself to a certain extent. When I talk about it, you got to understand that it's coming from somebody who just had no idea whatsoever.
Yeah, and part of what was really interesting about that experience, you see, Nick was basically a non-psychic person at that point in time. Rachel is a psychic, has been a psychic for a long time, and has embraced her abilities. So it was really interesting to see the difference in the responses that they got. My initial anticipation was that it would be off the charts, not even close to the same responses or anything like that. But a little more detail about the actual experiment itself. the person that's farther away, one of the people that's in a different room is the one asking the questions. The person with the blindfold, the headphones, basically you're doing deprivation of senses type experiment there. They don't know what the questions are ahead of time. Half the time the answers don't make any sense unless you have the question. But in our particular experiment, we asked the exact same questions of each person at different times, and we actually got very similar results.
Oh yeah, I remember that drive back from Gainesville, and we decided to go over the notes. You and Rachel were sitting up front, and I was in the back, and I had the notebook. And we were just going over my session and her session, just flipping through the responses we got. And at the time, Rachel and I didn't even realize that we were hearing a lot of the things that we heard. We didn't even realize we said some of the responses that we said, which was really interesting to me, because it's like you get lost. You get completely lost when you're performing this experiment. Well, it is an experience. And we did it again here at the theater up in the apartments, the old apartments. And that one really tripped me out, because as we were performing that experiment, and we had a couple of more scientific-minded people with us that day. I think we had Cindy Little, one of our Brain Trust members, and Janet, who I hope at some point can come on the show and talk about things with us, because she's an awesome investigator. I remember coming out of it thinking that it was like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes or something, and it ended up being like 45 minutes later. It was strange to me how that time just seemed to get lost.
Yeah, and when you came out of that, you weren't like exhausted.
No.
It was an interesting thing to witness.
Right, yeah. I mean, like she said, I wasn't like exhausted when I came out. That's why I didn't understand that it had been 45 minutes and not just 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, and we had that same experience at the Hill House as well. It was like, oh my God, we've been doing this an hour. We got to stop.
yeah, because I remember at one point I was recording with my cell phone, and I have an iPhone, which is typically a long-lasting battery life. And it was on full charge, and I looked at the phone and realized that we were an hour and 20 minutes into the video, and that my battery was nearly drained, which was very odd for my iPhone battery to drain after an hour and a half. So that goes to speak of how much energy as well is put into the experiment and how it can drain the technology that's around you.
Yeah, easily. And so that's one that we will definitely be performing while we're there. The last time I was at the Hill House was with a friend of mine, Sheila. Yay! Hey Sheila, if you're listening, hello. And we did an experiment in the bathtub and that one bathroom where the prostitute, I believe it was a murder-suicide, is the story behind that particular lady. Her name was Priscilla. And it was really interesting to see and witness that. Once again, Sheila was the one that was wearing the blindfold and the headphones, and it was amazing, some of the stuff that she was coming out with. And so we're definitely going to be doing that one there in the bathtub for sure.
That was definitely one of the things I wanted to ask you about, was potentially performing that experiment there. Because I remember not too long ago you sent a photo to Rachel and I, but you sent it to us separately. It wasn't as a group message. You sent it to us separately. And, of course, you were there in Mineral Wells. I was here in Marlin, and Rachel was at home in Leander. So, of course, we had no correlation that we had this conversation going on between the three of us. So you sent us a photo of that bathroom, and you asked each of us to respond with, what do you feel when you see this picture? And both of us responded with something along the lines of, who died in there, who got shot in there.
Yes.
And then I remember later on down the line asking you what you just confirmed for me. I was talking to Rachel in the car not too long ago. We were going to eat somewhere, And I asked her, I feel like it was like potentially a murder, a suicide type thing where a woman maybe killed a man who was rough to her or beat on her or something like that, and then she took her own life. So you saying that just now kind of confirms that to me. That's kind of where that story went. So it's a very interesting location, and I'm excited to go and perform that experiment there.
I can't wait either. And just a little tidbit of trivia on that, when they finally were able to open up that bathroom and get in there, it was sealed off after that particular incident by the people that owned it at the time, and that was before the current owners. They did actually find a bullet hole in one of the original, I want to say the toilet, or maybe it was the sink, but one of the original pieces of furniture in that bathroom, they did find a bullet hole. So we're going to move to commercial break. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about a couple of other types of experiments that we'll be performing there. So hang tight and enjoy those commercials again. Hello again. Hey, Nick Landy is still with us, our Paranormal Brain Trust member. And if you'll remember, before that commercial break, we were talking about the Ganzfeld experiment. And in those particular examples we were giving, we were actually using a spirit communication device or application software. We've used a couple of them over time. Our current favorite is Necrophonic. That's one that Nick introduced me to. I also like the Portal, and the Spirit Box is another one I use occasionally as well. And so those are the ones with either recorded word banks that are reversed, or they're relying on internet radio stations with a sweep backwards, things like that. The original Ganzfeld, though, actually used only white noise because that technology that we have today wasn't there. So Nick's going to speak to us about the white noise aspect of this particular experiment.
So I have to say that here recently, for me, it's all about trying to experiment with white noise, and we really haven't got to delve into that yet, and I hope we get to do it soon, and hopefully at the location we're going to in Mineral Wells. But white noise just seems to be one of the easiest conduits, I guess, for spirits to come through and speak to us. Especially on the old-timey tube TVs, not the flat screens like we have now. You'll just get a digital black signal. But, on the old tube TVs, when the station would cut out at night, or you flip to a station that you didn't receive on your cable package or whatever, you would get just this snowy kind of screen with white noise. And I can remember having a little, 19-inch, maybe not even that big TV in my bedroom when I was a kid, and it would cut out at night sometimes after the national anthem and the American flag waving, and it would cut out. We're going back into the 80s and 90s here now, folks, maybe even farther back than that. But I remember it would cut out, and it would be the white noise, and the white noise would help me relax. It would help me fall asleep. It would help me stay asleep, and for some reason, it would help me when I was dreaming. It would help me wake up and remember my dreams better. And this is when I was a kid too. And I can remember, vividly dreaming about family members that had recently passed away, and I can remember that white noise going when something at the house that we used to live in happened, the house that I spoke to before in one of the earlier episodes. So white noise seems to be a conduit for spirits to talk to us, and that's one of the things that paranormal investigators have gotten away from.
I think so. I'm one of them. Rely a little more on technology than I probably should. One of the great things about white noise is it's pure. It's not complicated. It's not words or syllables. It's not man-made necessarily from the speaking vocabulary angle. That's what I like about white noise.
Right. Same thing. And, there's apps that you can get on your phone that produce white noise, but it's not
the
real
same.
white noise. And there's even if you go on Spotify, they have a white noise station. They have a couple of different ambient sound stations. But for me, I just want to get an old TV, and I just want to plug it up, and I just want that white noise to go, and I want to see what happens.
Do you think it has something to do with the electricity aspect of the tube TVs and that particular white noise versus even like the little white noise wave machines that people
Right.
use as sleeping? I like those a lot better than the apps on our phones and through the computers. Do you think it has something to do with that?
I think it does, especially on the old TVs. They put out so much energy, and they took so much energy to go compared to the more digital, high definition, high resolution TVs that we have today. And TVs aren't made the same anymore either. You know, you had the old tubes. That's why they called them tubes.
Yeah.
Tube TVs.
Yeah.
That produced more energy. And that could be a big time contributing factor in it, because we've already spoke to how anything that conducts energy can give energy to spirits.
Right.
Batteries draining, a location that's close to train tracks, the natural energy that mineral water and stuff like that provides and puts out. And the technology in those old TVs would be the exact same thing.
Oh, definitely. So that's one that we're definitely going to be exploring a little further. In fact, are you the one that's located the TV with the tubes?
I think that was Rob.
Is that Rob?
I think
Okay.
Rob found the old tube TVs, but I'm sure as much as I don't want to say as much of a hoarding family as my family is, I wouldn't doubt it if we had some old tube TVs laying around somewhere ourselves in some garages or something. But yeah, I think Rob actually located one recently that we are able to use, and I have to wonder if we could even use the old timey radios too, that you would used to see in hotels back in the 30s or 40s and 50s, the way they were made with the big tubes and stuff and everything in them.
Oh, yeah. I would think that would be an excellent alternative. Like when we were doing the LaSalle shops, we did that investigation
Right.
there.
Oh, yeah.
That one radio, oh my gosh, that thing was awesome. Still don't have a real answer on it.
Still don't. And the thing about this radio, folks, that are listening here, we this LaSalle shops used to be a hotel, I think,
Yes.
right? Back in
Yes.
the day. And some of the items that were still there were remnants left over from the hotel. And there's this one specific radio, and we're not talking about a radio that you put on a counter or tabletop anyway. It's a tall radio that stands on the floor, freestanding on the floor.
It was like, what, a Philco from the
A
1940s
Philco,
or something
from
like that?
the 40s. And this radio had some abnormally high EMF spikes going on around it. And we say abnormal because it was not located anywhere near a breaker box or working electricity or outflow of electricity or anything like that around in the hotel. It was in its own little spot upstairs, tucked away, and the radio itself was not plugged in or putting out any electricity. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, it was. So based on that alone, it would be interesting to try the radio as an alternative as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, so that's the Gansfeld. And that, like I said, the whole point of the Gansfeld is that sensory deprivation. So you're not hearing any external noises. You're not seeing anything for your brain to get distracted by. It's just listening for that communication from the spirit. And I'm wondering, I would kind of like to try dowsing rods with this Gansfeld combination. Yeah. I think that will be really interesting to see, A, if it would work, right, and B, what kind of answers we would get, since we're restricted to yes, no, basically.
Right, yeah.
I wonder, though, if the actual being deprived of your senses would allow you to make some accidental movements on the dowsing rods versus, but then again, maybe not, since you're holding them. What do you think on that, Nick?
So,
am I just blowing smoke?
Well, so I'm thinking that we could try it that way with the person who's doing the Gansfeld itself, holding the rods, or we could go a different route and have the person that's doing the Gansfield just do the Gansfield, and maybe have somebody else close by that's holding the rods.
Okay.
The person doing the Gansfield, they have the headphones, the noise canceling headphones. They have the blindfold. They're not able to see the person with the rods. And it'd be interesting to see if the person doing the Gansfield can come up with the same answers of the direction the rods are moving.
That would be interesting confirmation. In fact, we could even try a pendulum in that similar situation.
Right.
So that would be good, because I know you and Rachel both like using the pendulum for divination. So that'll be interesting as well, because we're going to have a couple of newbies with us.
Oh, yeah, we are. Excited about that one, too. And I know they listen to the podcast, so my Aunt Cindy, my cousin Riley, can't wait to have y'all come along for this one. And I think they're from that side of the family that seems to be more sensitive, and I bet they've got some abilities tucked away in there somewhere too. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole for me later down the road, but we're starting to find out some very interesting facts about that side of the family, about where we're from, how we developed. We've traced some roots back to Wiccan roots and possibly Gypsy roots. Celtic roots are in there. So starting to understand a lot more where that side of the family and my mom's side of the family comes from with the abilities and everything.
All right, so we're going to close out for today's episode. Be sure and tune in next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about our upcoming investigation of the Haunted Hill House in Mineral Wells. So y'all have a great week.
You are listening to Topic Paranormal with your host, Georgina Holzmeyer, and the Paranormal Brain Trust, Robert M. Brown, Nick Landy, and Rachel Sosa. Topic Paranormal covers Paranormal Talk, Paranormal Tales, Paranormal Training, and so much more. Experience the topics of conversation on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Topic Paranormal. Have a topic suggestion or a question? Send an email to topicparanormal@gmail.com or post it to the Topic Paranormal Facebook page. Topic Paranormal is part of the Astronet Radio family. Visit astronetradio.com for more awesome podcasts.
This episode, copyright 2019 by astronetradio.com. All rights reserved.